This is E. Whitford, retired correction officer, 26 years of service, 23 and a half of them at my state place today. I'm talking about Elmira Correctional Facility and Reception Center. It's known throughout the community as the Reformatory because it was built in 1876 as just that, a reformatory aimed at working with younger men in an attempt to try to help them to reform themselves. Zebulon Brockway was the original superintendent who supervised the building. He had been involved in corrections for over 50 years and was well known and well respected. The facility was built by inmates, mostly out of Auburn, who came back and forth each day. When it was well enough structured so that they could stay there, they started bringing in inmates, and in 1879 they completed it, and it went from 500 inmates up to over 1,700 over the years. The cells, interestingly enough, are twice as large as the ones that were at Sing Sing. The idea was that it didn't press the inmates so much. It made them feel less dense, and it worked out pretty well. There were two ideas that Zebulon Brockway brought with him. One was adults versus juvenile offenders. Up until this time, all inmates were simply sent to a jail regardless of who they were, what their crimes were, and worse, their age. However, it came about through much study that separating the younger inmates had a better chance to work with them and make it less crazy, shall we say. The second idea came from that was the possibility of rehabilitation. If you caught someone early enough and worked on them, perhaps made a mind change, they would be able to fit back in society. There was psychological methods used rather than physical. A lot of beatings, which were common, and the idea of a prison is the guards with their big truncheons beating on people. That idea came slowly to be diminished. The batons are still in use for defensive purposes and will always have to be, but they weren't used as a tool to simply take out your rage on some person. Physical activities, teaching rather than preaching, because preaching didn't get very far with these people. They wanted to change them to law-abiding behavior. There were 3 grades for the inmates who came into the jail. Everyone entered was in the 2nd grade, which had certain rights and privileges with it. And you were this way for 6 months. After 6 months, if you were cooperative and responsive, you could go up to 1st grade, and you could have a few more privileges, a few more activities available to you. Also a possibility of reduction in sentence and early parole. However, if you were difficult, causing trouble, fighting, stealing, getting into problems, you could be reduced to 3rd grade and you lost almost all of your privileges. There was a strict military discipline code established by Joseph Scott in 1887. The inmates were taught to act like recruits in a training session. They did marching, formations, this, that, and around. They had uniforms, and some wore better uniforms because they were the leaders. They carried wooden guns, and they did different types of handling of the weapons, as you've seen in military movies. There were many programs introduced. There was the teaching of ethics. Religion was still taught, but it wasn't the foremost. There was vocational training. There were lectures. Mark Twain and Thomas K. Beecher, among many others, came to speak more than once. Brockway also believes that the inmates, by meeting people from the local community and establishing some kind of connection, would think about trying to get back out there. By 1894, there were 34 trades taught. There was eventually an expansion to reading and GED prep and other kinds of programs. The programs were taught initially by people who were just prison guards there who just stepped up, and it wasn't as successful until they started working very hard to make it fit. Now, Brockway ran the jail with an iron fist, but he was also very fair and gave people opportunities. And he was there until 1901 when he retired. We're going to take a break now. We'll come back with another session.
The Senior Notebook will return in a moment.
Hi, Fran Whitford back again talking about Elmira Correctional Facility. There are many people who ran the jail after Dr. Frank Christian came in 1908 as a doctor and did a lot of work there. And in 1917, he was promoted to superintendent. While there, he did what he called the psychological laboratory. He gave a physical examination to each convict. He took a social history. He did IQ and other psych tests to see what they're physically capable of and perhaps determine where they should go, because then they could find out a job to keep them busy that wouldn't keep them bored. He also, after much testing, decided that, quote, 37% were mentally deficient, unquote, and they were not capable of holding high-level jobs or being able to do a lot of things. They were taught simple skills such as janitorial duties, how to mend and sew clothes by hand, some food preparation and other things that could be used out on the street to get a job, perhaps only menial, but something that could feed them. In 1935, Dr. Christian built the Reformatory Clubhouse. He knew that his people were hard workers and he was well respected and listened to what they had to say, so he built the clubhouse as a place where they could go to have some kind of time to relax. A beautiful view of the valley outside in the country. In 1939, Dr. Christian was walking to his car, which was parked inside the facility, and two convicts followed him. They held razor blades to his throat and told him, "Let us out of here, drive us out of the jail, and we'll kill you." Dr. Christian fought him off, not bad for a man of his age, quite old, and eventually help came and he controlled it. However, he retired 3 months later, no doubt because he realized the job was no longer for him. The convicts put on many shows over the year in the auditorium. They prepared singing, dancing, musical instruments, some acting, different things. And people from the outside were invited to come in. A friend of mine was telling me one day that he was with his father when he was a little boy, coming down Bancroft Road, and a man with a flashlight turned him up towards the prison. Then he followed the traffic and went into the prison, parked in the big field house, which was an all-dirt floor, very, very large field house, and went to the show. Had a great time, came home, told all his family about how he'd been to jail, and later became a correction officer. There were farms at the prison. The produce which they were able to grow was so much that they were able to can it and feed themselves a lot of the food that they needed. They had slaughtering of beef cattle and chickens and pigs, and that fed them a lot, but over time, for various reasons, they had to drop those. For a long time, they had a dairy farm right up until about 15 years ago that produced record amounts of milk. New York State Department of Agriculture recognized them for their quantity and quality. Unfortunately, that fell by the wayside too. Now, let me talk to you about something that you may see when you drive by. It's a statue. It is called The Man Helping the Boy. It is a statue of a man standing with his hand on the shoulder of a young boy, trying to give him an idea of what he can teach him, what he can show him to make him think that he can make a better life. It was built by Elmira Anderson in the 1930s. When President Roosevelt created all of his different programs, he created the WPA, Works Progress Administration, and part of that was to help artists and writers and composers to do all the things that they wanted to do and pay them so that they could earn a living. Mr. Anderson was contacted by the prison, and he decided that he would make the statue. Took some time to develop it. First, he created a plaster cast of a small structure and played with it until he got what he wanted, with the man standing with the boy next to him. Then they built a larger one, and then they made a mold in the foundry, and they poured bronze and completed it. He did this with the help of inmate labor under the supervision of the foundry supervisors, and the statue stands today as a reminder of the goal of the prison to try to help these young men better themselves. Now, Elmira is no longer a prison for younger men. That has been moved to another jail. The average age of the convicts there is 35. It's a tough job. A lot of good people have worked very hard. I have great respect for them, and we're going to talk about some of them. Thank you. Have a good day.
The Senior Notebook will return in a moment.
Hi, Fran Whitford back again. I'd like to talk about some of the employees I worked with. On my job in over 26 years, I probably worked with well over 2,000, if not more, different individuals. I want to mention a few by name. If you face the front of the prison, you'll see a flagpole, and on that flat area are pavers with the names of some who are passed away. And I'd like to mention some by name and tell a little bit about them. The first I want to mention is Fred D. Robinson. We had two gentlemen with that name. One we call Black Fred Robinson, the other White Fred Robinson. Both good men. Fred D. Robinson, the black gentleman who I worked with, was one of the first people I met, helped me along in the first couple of weeks, asked me if I had any questions, and was willing to help me. The first day I started on a job, actually doing something other than walking around, Fred Robinson took me to the reception center. They sent me up to the second floor. An officer gave me a key and told me walk down and just check the cells. They knew that I had experience, so it wasn't like a rookie, and I would find something and I'd know it. So I walked down, saw nothing, got to the end of the gate, put in the key, opened the gate, pushed it, stepped forward, and got covered by 6 million cockroaches. I looked back, and there were 3 guys laughing at me. I won't mention 2, but I will mention George Lauman, who had a great sense of humor. I was angry, as you can imagine, shook it off, took off my shirt, got rid of the cockroaches, walked around, and when I opened the other gate, I stepped back. When I got to the end of the gallery, I knew they were testing me because this is the way you test somebody. Any little thing that you can do, get a rattle. So I just laughed at them. They accepted me and I went on. I worked a long time for a guy by the name of Dan Denkenberger. He was a chart sergeant. That's a tough job. You've got to be able to fit people in. Some have bid jobs, but a lot of people are extra or people filling in for the day and things of that nature. Dan did a great job. He was very fair, very conscientious. As an officer, he'd been very tough, had a good reputation as someone who could handle it. As a supervisor, I truly enjoyed working for him. I want to mention Bill Folsby. Bill and I started together. Bill died in 1999, and I was able to interview him for a story that I'm writing about the prison. Bill told me that the first time something happened, he had to make a decision. Was he going to get involved and help break up a fight or a situation, or was he going to run? He says, I didn't run, and I felt good about that. And that's the type of people that I enjoyed working with. Then there was Zebulon Brockway, who was the first superintendent. No, I didn't work with him, but I'd heard a lot about him. Mr. Brockway came with 50 years experience and left with more. He retired to Elmira, where he later became a mayor because they needed a kind of a candidate both sides could agree on. Now we go to Tom Golden. Anybody that ever knew Tom Golden knew one of the finest men that ever walked this earth. Always with a smile, always with a good word. Convicts respected him, as they did good men like him, because he treated them as he should, fair, firm, and consistent. But also he treated everybody this way. And it was truly enjoyable to work with him. Now, there's always some crazies in every group, and I'm going to tell you about one. Charles A.J. Ajamian. A.J., as we call him, was a kind of a heavy-set guy, not too tall, curly hair, always a smile. Whenever he worked outside, he always wore a hat. Didn't matter what. He might have a ball cap. He might have a cowboy hat. He didn't care. It wasn't uniform. It was A.J. A.J. spoke Arabic because he was a Christian from an Arabic country who had come to America, and he was often up in the mosque, which is the place where the Muslims go. And his job up there was to be in security to watch what's going on. But what he would do many times is when the inmates were trying to speak Arabic, he would converse with them in Arabic. A lot of times they didn't appreciate it. They came to realize that he was simply helping them out. A.J. was known for being wacky, and one day he spent the entire day walking around with one of those little baby mouth suckers, and he kept it in his mouth, and he waved it around when he talked, and the whole day. A lot of people, including convicts, thought he was a little crazy, and that always helped on the job. Tom Tierney was an officer who took classes and became a teacher. Tom walked into the classroom and told an inmate, come here, son, I want to talk to you. He asked the inmate a lot of questions, wrote them down, went home, typed it out. Next day came in and handed it to the young man and said, read this. He said, I can't read. Tom said, you can read more than you think. What's that? Well, that's my name. What's that? It's your mom's name. And the inmate struggled, and he was able to read. Tom Tierney became a teacher. I worked with many great and wonderful people. I miss them. All of these have passed on to their reward. And when I see my friends, I say hello, and that's about it. So for today's session, thank you for listening, and have a great week.